What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to make a counter for the countercades. We're going to make a bar for the bar tops. We're going to make a shelf, but it's going to be a really nice shelf. I wanted something to not only support my collection of countercades, but hide all the wiring so that it's a nice clean look. So what I've got here is some 1x12s, common boards, the common pine, the cheapest stuff that they had at Home Depot because I wanted the knots and the grain and the character. So I've got my Kreg jig out and we're going to drill a lot of pocket holes because I want to screw this together in a way that hides all the fasteners. Basically, I want this to kind of look like a big piece of wood that's sort of mounted to the wall, similar to like a mantle over a fireplace. So we've got two 1x12s and then we also have a 1x6 that's going to serve as the face of this shelf. So with a good thick bead of glue on the 1x6, I'm going to go ahead and use a couple clamps to hold the two pieces together, and then we're going to fasten them from the back side with all the screws about 1 foot on center. So I've cut a couple pieces to I think about 11 1/4 inches, and we're going to go ahead and prep this before we take it over to the workpiece. This is going to be fairly important because as the side, it's going to serve as an anchor point for not only the top of the shelf, but the second piece that I'm going to show you a little bit later. So once again, lots of glue, as well as the screws themselves. Into the pockets we go. Anchor the first one on the bottom, and then line up the top piece, and then you can see how it brings that together nice and tight. Now, because everything in my arcade has to have an LED strip, we're going to go ahead and offset the bottom shelf by about 1/2 inch. So you subtract the thickness of the wood, and that gives me the height of my center support boards. Now I'm going to have 3 of these in between the 2 boards to offer support and anchor together. And I also want to be able to pass wires through them. So I'm going to go ahead and drill, I think it's about 1.25 inch hole over here on the drill press. Just allow me to run the wires between there. They're going to have to go to points along the entire length of the shelf, and of course hit them with a round over bit to give it a nice smooth transition. Also a couple pocket holes as a way to kind of fasten this to what you're looking at now. That's the top shelf, and then the face board is the board on the bottom there. Now the bottom board that makes up the bottom of the shelf is exactly the same dimensions as the top board. And because of that, it's going to be a nice snug fit, which is what you want, so don't be afraid to pound it in place with a rubber mallet. I did give it a quick coat of black paint, just because it's going to be on the bottom side and not visible. And the only thing left is, once it's in place, is to glue it and screw it. So to maintain the same spacing on the end of the shelf, I'm going to go ahead and use a spacer and a clamp to keep it in place while I screw it. Which is going to give you, once again, a nice snug fit, so take extra precaution when removing the spacer. It's time to lock and load the brad nailer, and just going to put a few brad nails in the bottom here. The wall anchors, or the wall brackets, are actually going to intersect with these 3 pieces, so I don't need much here, just a few brad nails to kind of keep that tight. So when it comes to finishing the shelf, we're not going to be nice and clean and smooth. We're going to take a sanding disc or a flapper wheel on a grinder, and we're just going to go over the entire surface because I don't want this to look like pieces that were screwed together. You can see the seams, nice straight corners and points, and I don't want that. I want to round everything over, and as I work, I'm actually creating divots and notches to kind of make this look like a big single piece of wood. Think of like a log cabin with all the imperfections. This is going to simulate like hammer marks and chiseling. So just kind of get creative, and this is one of those situations where the imperfections are actually what you're trying to highlight. Now remember, on the top part of the shelf, you are going to have your countercades or whatever you're going to have on your shelf. So you want that to be sort of flat. And yeah, you're going to get a little dirty. So before I go any further, I just want to blow off the piece that I'm working on and then just kind of take a look at it and see if I've got enough damage. And this is going to be personal preference, your taste. If you want it rougher, if you want it smoother, it's really just kind of up to you. So, you know, be creative, but don't be afraid to make a mistake. And now it's time to torch it. We're going to take the butane torch and actually add a little bit more character to this, and we're going to highlight some of the personality of the wood. So we're going to go over and hit the knots and kind of bring that color out. We're going to kind of highlight some of the grain just in random areas, and this is going to be personal preference. But if you do this, especially if you're going to stain it, this just kind of helps to bring out some of the uniqueness of the piece that you're working on. And like I said, you can do as little or as much as you want with this. It's really just personal preference. So it's a cold day in the shop, but we're going to go ahead and continue on with applying the stain. It's probably better to do it when it's a little bit warmer, but in the wintertime, you really don't have much of an option. This is going to be the dark walnut, and it's really going to be dark when you first put it on, but don't let that fool you. It will lighten up a little bit after it dries. Here I'm just marking out where I'm going to drill the holes for the power for each countercade. Now, honestly, I probably could have done this before I stained it. Hindsight being 20/20, but it was kind of cold outside, so I wanted to go ahead and get it stained, and then I brought it inside where it was a little bit warmer so it could really cure over time. Using a Forstner bit is not going to completely destroy it like maybe a drill bit would, so it's not horrible, but I think I'm going to go ahead and clean this up. And once I get all the holes sort of drilled, I'm going to go back and hit this with a little bit of stain on the very edge. But the rubber grommet is going to cover up all that. Alright, so with the majority of the shelf fabricated, it's time to go ahead and install a new outlet. This is how we're going to hide all that wiring. The power is going to be hidden right behind our shelf. So once I have everything marked on the wall, I went ahead and took my new workbox, traced it out, and then I'm using an oscillating tool here to make a nice clean cut in the wood paneling. Now remember, I'm in a basement with a drop ceiling, so I just moved one of the ceiling tiles out of the way, and I'm running the Romex wire down to the new hole I just cut in the wall. And then you just pull the wire through the old workbox and then tighten up the 2 screws that fasten it to the wall. So now that I've got my outlet in place, I'm going to go ahead and secure my brackets to the wall. Obviously, we're going to go into studs because of the weight that we're going to carry. And if your level isn't quite long enough to reach between brackets, you can always take a board like I've done here and then place your level on that and just work your way down. And it looks like I've got one more modification to the shelf. The LED sensor needs to be visible so you can use the remote. So I want to go ahead and cut a notch on the top here with my router so that that will sit nice and flush when it's pressed against the wall. A little bit of hot glue on the back side of the unit, and the sensor will hold that in place. Now before I run out this entire LED strip, I'm going to go ahead and do a quick test. And now for some reason, if your LEDs don't come on, remember they are polarity sensitive, so the fix may be just as simple as unplugging it, rotating it 180 degrees, and then plugging it back in. So now it's time to install those rubber grommets and all the AC adapters for the countercades. Luckily I have enough wire length per AC adapter to where we're going to get away with just one power strip in the center. I thought with the 8-foot length we may have to have 2, but no, one's going to do the job. And now with everything pre-wired, it's time to put this thing in place. We're just going to plug it in the wall. We're going to tuck all the excess up into the cavity of the shelf. And now it's time to fasten those brackets to the shelf. Now remember, we lined up our center supports with the location of these brackets, so I'm not going to be concerned with drilling through the wood and into the wires. Now, because it was so close, I'm going to go back to the fuse box to power this outlet. And this is some work you shouldn't do unless you're trained and qualified, so I'm not going to go into a bunch of detail here. But once we make our final power connections, now it's time to turn everything on and see how it looks. Now this thing looks great when the lights are off, but because of all the attention we paid to the shelf, it looks just as good when the lights are on. You have all the character, all the imperfections really kind of make this thing stand out, and carving out that notch on the back to expose that sensor was really worth the effort. I'm not having any issues changing the colors or turning them off and on. So this was a pretty simple project, but kind of a lot of fun. I wanted something that looked like a big piece of wood, like a mantle over a fireplace, and this definitely does the trick, and it also gives these countercades a home where they didn't really have one before. Anyway, thanks for stopping by. Let me know what you think about this in the comments section, and I will see you next time.